See, this is the point of the podcast. This is showing you the true poets behind the scenes.
There you go.
You see Nathalia on stage being all confident and all of that. No, this is the real Nathalia right here. This is what it's all about. Hello and welcome to the Process Poetry Podcast. I am your host, Tyrone Lewis. I will figure out an opening spiel to this at some point, but today is not that day. Today is, though, the day when I have a wonderful guest with me, so please can we welcome to the Poetry Podcast, the Process Poetry Podcast, I should say, Nathalia. This would be like insert applause, sound effects here or something like that.
Thank you to the invisible applause.
There you go.
Thanks for having me,
No
Tyrone.
worries.
I'm really happy to be here.
No worries. So first and foremost, just obviously, how are you doing?
I'm all right. My voice is a bit gone for no reason, but apart from that, I'm having a good day.
Perfect for a podcast. Perfect for a
Right.
podcast. Well, yeah, I guess almost like as my challenge for me with all my podcast guests is almost a level of trying to figure out when was the first time I met you. But I think yours, thankfully, is an easy one in that I met you at Goddamn Poetry Jam.
Yes.
Like, how was that as an event for you, just in general, going to that?
It was a lot of fun. I think it was quite different than other events I'd been to in terms of the type of crowd and, you know, the energy of the wonderful host who just screams a lot but like keeps the energy going. So it was a lot of fun.
Jamal is a wonderful host. He's got a lot of energy, which is good, but oh god, I cannot keep up with him sometimes, but it is wonderful. And like, was that like your first time going to Goddamn Poetry Jam?
It was my very first time.
It wasn't. That was a fun event, and you were definitely one of the highlights there. And it was that thing of like, oh, you're good, and then you went to other events. It's like, yes, cool, you've come to other events. This is good to know.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But yes, as I mentioned before we started recording, I've got a couple of sections and segments I want to do with you. So we'll be starting off now with the timeline segment of this all. I was tempted to call it like the Charles Dickens or the Ghosts of Christmas Past kind of segment because we're going past, present, and future, but timelines feels simpler.
All right.
So going with timeline, let's go to your past. And as it is a poetry podcast, in your past, how did you get into poetry and the spoken word? Like, was there a moment when it's like, I'm writing, or had you like always been writing, or like, what was your origin story, I guess?
I think to start with, when I was like 9 years old, and that was when I didn't used to speak English very well yet. My first language was like French and Arabic. So I used to read in French. And I read some poetry in French in school. And I was like, oh my God, I need to write my own poetry. And so I'd kind of go back home and I'd ask my mom to type it on her big ass computer at the time. And I'd ask her to print them out for me and kind of classify them. And then I'd still have them to this day in like this little folder. These very cringy little 9-year-old poems. So I think that's where I originally started. But growing up, I just stopped writing for years and years. And then I only came back to it, I think, when I was about 15 years old. But at the time, I used to write like these short story articles type things. And I only started poetry again like 2 years ago, I think, and performed for the first time again also around that time about a year ago. So I think it's been an up and down journey, but initially it was literally because I was a kid and I thought I wanted to be special and I wanted to write poetry, and then it just became more of a therapy situation, which I think is common for a lot of us poets.
And then like, with the whole performing side of it, like, was it just there was an open mic you wanted to get onto it, or like was there always an idea of like, one day I wouldn't mind performing this?
I don't think the idea was always there. I think I used to see these spoken word videos on YouTube and stuff like that, and I always thought it was just amazing. And then one day they announced an open mic event in Abu Dhabi, and I got really excited. And I was like, I want to try it out. And I did. And the second I stepped off the stage, I just knew that I wanted to be back up there again. I just really, really loved the feeling. And that's just how it started, I guess.
Well, I guess almost now it was not showing my ignorance, but talking from a level of ignorance here, like with you being in Abu Dhabi, like how accessible was spoken word in general there, like in terms of getting into it and watching it? Like, was it just like a YouTube video went viral? Did you go searching for it? Or how did that even come into your kind of radar?
I think in terms of like finding out about poetry, that was more the international scene. So I'd see button poetry videos. It's my sister actually who introduced me to the first button poetry video. But in terms of the scene itself in Abu Dhabi or more generally in the UAE, It's quite scarce, is what I like to say. So there is a small poetry community. There are events that happen maybe once a month or so. There's rooftop rhythms, which are like the big community, and they've been growing for years. But it's still not the same as London, where you can find maybe 2 events every single night. Like, no, it's more scarce, but it's growing. It's quite different though from here.
The fair. Well, like, and now you touched on London, I guess is a good kind of segue to go into the present then. And like, obviously, a lot is going on in all of your life, as I kind of vaguely aware. But nevertheless, you're present in poetry. Like, how would you describe your present times in poetry and like being vaguely involved in the London scene?
I think my poetry grew a lot since I moved here. I think, first of all, because there's so much more opportunity to go and see other poets, to perform, to kind of go to poetry workshops. There's just a lot more going on, which is already an incentive to kind of go more into it. But also in terms of, I think, my experience here, it just gave me a lot more to say than what I had to say back home. So I think back home I was still in my comfort zone, and my poems were therefore also kind of in my comfort zone. They were all about, I'd say almost not shallow, but shallow. Like just on very, I think, superficial stuff, or rather things that were easy to talk about. And I think moving here and being a foreigner in this country, and seeing all of these amazing artists as well, it just really pushed me to do more than that. And so I'd say that I've become more of a poet here than I ever used to be back home.
And like in terms of being a poet here, like I've also seen like on your Instagram, you do a lot of like little reels to camera, etc. It's like, where would you say your poetry is now? Like, what are you doing with your poetry now? If you want to say you're doing anything with it, like, what is the thing for now?
I think the whole reason I started posting on Instagram was always because I would hope that I'm saying something and that someone out there is going to see the Instagram and be like, whoa, I feel that. And I think the reason I wanted to do that is because I always looked a lot to social media to find artists that could just make me feel something. And I was hoping to be the same for someone else. I keep hitting the mic.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, to be the same for someone else. And I think, again, since I was a lot more inspired in London, I started posting a lot more. And I think even when I go through phases when I'm not writing a lot, which I am in one of those phases right now, I feel like I'm just trying to gather experiences from being in London and try to kind of put that into my poetry.
No, fair. And I guess now looking forward to the future then for you, like, where do you see yourself going with poetry? Like, is poetry the potential career path, or is it a fun hobby on the side? And with that, like, is it more performances or potentially looking into publishing or other stuff? Like, what is your future in poetry?
I think that I've always seen poetry as more of a hobby than anything else, but I think it's because I've never seen the side of it that could be more than a hobby. And it's only, again, after moving here that I see a lot of people that are publishing books or that are really trying to put the scene out there like you are. And I do think that I've been considering it a bit more. It's just that realistically speaking, I just know that that isn't something I can prioritize right now in my life. Like, I'm still studying. I'm going to be starting to work soon, and it's just still on the side. But what I do see myself doing is just to continue to grow as a writer, and maybe potentially, whenever I do feel like I have enough to say, maybe put it into a book or try to actually do something with it and put it out there properly and reach a bigger audience. I think something I'd like to do.
Well, in terms of growing as a writer, then I guess one of the questions again on future is that thing of like, are there any like topics you feel like you haven't touched on enough that you want to touch on more? Like, is there like that poem of like, I always keep coming back to this poem, this is the poem that I will eventually crack, or anything like that? Like, is there something that's like, oh no, this is the one I keep coming back to or want to do?
I wouldn't say that there's a single poem that I come back to, but I think there's one theme that I'm always going back to, and it's sort of the Lebanese, or I'd say more generally Arab identity, because back home I always felt like I wasn't Lebanese enough, or I kind of didn't quite fit into my own culture. And then moving here, I realized, oh my God, while I'm here, I fit a lot more in my own culture than I do in the culture here. And it's kind of this experience of feeling like a foreigner in foreign land, but also feeling like a foreigner in your own hometown. And I think that's something that I really want to speak about more, because it's such a common experience. And I think, like, at least amongst us Arabs, it's not spoken about a lot. And what I would love to do is just be able to bring that forward, because I've had conversations with other, for example, Lebanese people that have moved here, and it really is like such a common predominant experience that we all have. And I think I really want to speak about that more.
And I think it's also a very interesting theme to talk about, especially because, like, whilst I think the poetry scene does a lot of things well and is good at doing a lot of levels of, like, diversity and inclusion, like, I've had a couple of conversations with friends about, like, whenever we're, like, programming events, hosting events or whatever, we kind of, like, not that we have to tick every single box kind of thing. There's a bit of, like, oh, cool, we're doing a lot for, not a lot, but, like, we're doing good things for trans people, we're doing good for non-binary, for queer people, for black, for women, etc., and all that kind of stuff. And I think, not to put people in boxes, but one of the things that I'm aware of that a lot of the London scene does seem to miss or not cover much is kind of Asian or East Asian voices, etc., and anything like that. And, like, I can say off the top of my head, like, I know, like, one or two Lebanese poets kind of thing, and it's like, that is an area that's kind of missing. And, like, as you've been in the scene here, like, do you feel that's the case in the scene here?
I completely agree. I mean, I've been to so many events since I moved, and I only met a single Lebanese person at one of these events, and she wasn't even there to perform or anything. She was just there to watch. And I remember I was performing a poem, and the first line of the poem was in Arabic. And for the first time ever, I say the first line, and someone in the audience go, "Woo!" And I was like, that is a feeling I hadn't had before, because I've never been performing in front of an audience that has anyone that's Lebanese or Arab more generally. And I think it would be nice to see more of that on the scene. But in the same time, I'm not sure it's something that can be actively worked towards, because I'm not sure if it's the fact that the scene doesn't allow for it, or just that maybe, like, as Arabs, it's not a place or a scene that we orient ourselves towards. So I don't know, maybe there's a debate as to which one of that it is. Maybe it's a mix of both. But I think that what I would love, for example, is there are a lot of poems I have about identity that I think maybe people in London would relate to. But I think if I was speaking to a Middle Eastern audience, I think it would hit a lot more, because people would understand it. And I feel like it's different to have lived the experience and then to hear it from someone else, you know?
Well, on that then, like, it just comes to your poetry writing in general then. Like, how do you feel about, like, how do you feel in general? Because I've heard a lot of your poems, and a lot of your poems seem to be, like, one, they're really incredible poems, but two, like, they are speaking about some, I don't say minorities, that sounds like a bad way of phrasing it, but, like, you do have a lot of poems about, like, empowering women and empowering people that might not often have a voice in that kind of way. Like, how do you feel sharing those poems to audiences that might not be part of those groups? I'm not to say educating them, but at least sharing your story with them. Like, how is that for you?
I think at times I hesitate. I've had quite a few poems where before deciding whether I want to perform them, I think a lot like, will this be received well? Or is it really gonna, you know, complete its mission, like the purpose I have for this poem, or not? And for example, I have one poem right now that I was hesitating a lot to do, but I will perform it soon, I think. And it's about the waste management crisis in Lebanon. And I remember when I mentioned this, for example, to my family, their reaction was like, is that really the impression you want to give of our country, which is a country that's failing and collapsing? And it is something that I think about, because again, if I'm speaking about this to people who don't know anything about my country, and this is the impression I give, who is this benefiting? Because they're not going to relate to it or feel like someone's speaking on their behalf. And at the same time, they're going to get a very micro image of what my culture and my country represents. So it is a debate I have, but I think at the end of the day, I do this poetry because I need to say something. And I think it's worth saying something no matter who's listening, because you never know who might actually listen and think, okay, this is something I want to react to or something I relate to. You never know. So I think I just want to say it, even if it might not be well received or if it's not gonna do exactly what I want it to.
And I guess, like, I will obviously, like I said beforehand, move on to things that aren't just poetry related as well, but it's just on this last bit for the poetry side of things, like, how do you feel it's like almost an obligation for you to talk about that kind of stuff? And I say that as someone who, like, in the scene as a black poet, I feel that there's, whilst not an obligation, there's kind of an expectancy to talk about black issues. You see queer poets on the scene who will have a lot of poetry about being queer, and obviously a lot of that is you write about yourself, you write about what you know. How much of that do you feel is it's just what you know, therefore you write about it? How much of that do you feel is like an almost an, I guess, obligation, whatever? Like, how much do you think you are linked to that in terms of your writing?
That's a really interesting question. I wouldn't say it's an obligation, just because when I was back home, I never used to write about home, essentially,
fair.
or
Valid.
or really about more of these, what I call, like, I'd say, more serious subjects. And I think it's not because, so if I didn't have the obligation here, I feel here I would have even less of the obligation to do so, because no one really knows what I'm talking about. But I think it's more that coming here is what finally made me feel like these subjects were important to me as a person. And I think that's really the reason why I'm trying to express them through poetry. And a lot of times it's true that there are a lot of big subjects, like especially about Lebanon, that I do want to talk about, but they're so big that I'm like, I'm not ready to do that yet. And it's true that I do put a bit of pressure on myself in that sense. But I think the way it started, at least, was mostly me feeling like I'm finally relating to my own culture and just wanting to put that out there.
Brilliant. And now, on a hard subject change now, let's go for you outside of poetry and you as a person then. So when you are not on stage, what are you into? What do you do? Who is Nathalia when not performing?
Right.
Simple question.
Yeah. You'd be surprised at how I know how to make things complicated. No, but I guess when I'm not performing, what I used to be doing was studying a whole lot, because I was doing a postgrad in law, and that involves just a whole lot of reading. I'm actually kind of impressed at myself that I managed to write after having to read like boring stuff all the time. But aside from that, I think I love dancing. My weekend activity is to go on salsa nights, so you will see me there every weekend. That's actually something I picked up in London as well. And yeah, I think what I would say actually is, since moving to London, I've just been trying to do a lot of new things and to meet new people and to put myself in situations where I'm not necessarily comfortable. So that is like going to things alone. So going to salsa nights by myself. I've tried to go to a lot of concerts as well, because back home we don't get all of like the artists that I want to see, especially more of the low-key artists.
Well, yeah, I feel like I saw on your Instagram there was a lot of love for Dermot Kennedy, was it?
There was a lot of love for Dermot Kennedy. Actually, I've been listening to that artist since I was like 16 and never got the chance to watch him perform live, because he would never go to the UAE. Why would he? So the second I caught here, I was like, oh my God, okay. And I went and I saw him, and it was really, really great. So thank you, London. But yeah, I guess to sum it up, dancing, music, fitness is basically what I'm doing otherwise.
Fair. And like, I guess like how much of that, actually, you mentioned the whole London side of things, like what do you do when you're back, I guess, home? Like, is that similar activities, or was it different activities given it's a different place?
I think my life was much more boring back home, to be pretty blunt about it.
Fair.
I think back home there's a lot less to do in terms of cultural, musical kind of stuff. So what I used to do though is go to improv classes. I did improv classes for a while, which was a lot of fun. I used to go watch improv shows. And I used to play volleyball. I think that's the one thing that I used to do all the time back home, and that I completely stopped here. Because, by the way, volleyball is not a thing in London. Like, unless you're at like the professional level, like that's not really a big thing here, which was such a shock to me. But yeah, mostly also, I think the thing I did the most was go to the beach. And I've got to say, I love London, but also I miss the sea so much. So yeah.
On the boring questions, but almost feel like an obligation to ask now and talk about, as in, I am British, this will be a British podcast. How are you finding the weather here? How are you finding Londoners dealing with the weather here? How is that for you?
Oh, big question. I'm not gonna lie. I was expecting much worse when I came here, because I come from a country that's constantly summer, and I used to own like 2 hoodies maybe back home. So I got here in September, and I was really expecting the worst of the worst, but it was actually sunny for like September, October, November was mostly sunny from what I recall. And I was like, oh, okay, I can survive this. Like, it's okay. And as for the cold, you wear enough layers, you're fine. But then I came back I went home for a while and then came back in January. And it was raining all the time. And it was getting dark at 3 p.m. And to me, that was the worst part. It's just the sun. Like, I'm just used to 24/7 sun. So yeah, it was a bit tough. But in Dubai, in the summer, it gets to 50 degrees. And, you literally die every time you walk outside of your house. So I think it's just a kind of lesser of two evil situation. And I think I'd actually choose London in terms of that.
remember I went to Abu Dhabi last year, October time.
Okay.
And I was not ready for the heat. Was not ready for me at all. And like, especially because I was meant to be there doing some level of work, so I got to be professional. And that was not good heat for me. And it was always a thing. Like I fucking had like most of it was doing stuff for work stuff, and I was in often air conditioned rooms, so it wasn't too bad then. But I had like one of the days off, and it's like, cool, I've got a day off, I can now just walk around and explore. I had to buy a t-shirt midway through the day because I'd sweat through the one I was wearing. I was not ready for it. It's like, no, I can't keep wearing this. This is just nothingness. And yeah, I'm not good for that heat. So I feel you on the London.
Right? Yeah.
I feel you on the London.
And by the way, October is considered a good month for us. Like, October is like spring season. No, don't ever make the mistake of going to Dubai towards like the summer months, June, July, August. Do not do that to yourself. I promise you will regret it. But Dubai in winter is like perfect. People escape everywhere else and go to Dubai in the winter because it's actually like it's beach season. It's really nice.
As we've had a bit of Abu Dhabi and Dubai chat and all of that, let's go into, I guess, the differences between Abu Dhabi and London in terms of poetry. And I think some of them may be obvious, but nevertheless, it's still worth going over there. Like you already mentioned, the whole idea of like the number of nights, etc. So like just in general, like give us a quick overview or paint the scene or paint the picture of the scene over there.
All right. So this is what I know from the scene, knowing that maybe there's some events or some things.
No. I'm expecting you to be the authority on everything.
Right. I know.
Everything here is
exactly. I exclude any liability. Anyone from Abu Dhabi, Dubai watching this, I apologize. No. Okay. So what I know is that there are two main kind of communities in the UAE. There's Rooftop Rhythms in Abu Dhabi. They usually do their events in the campus of NYU that's located in Abu Dhabi, and they do it like once a month. Sometimes it's open mics. They also have a slam that they do yearly. It's a quite big community, actually. I mean, they get big audiences. I remember I performed there about, I think, twice. And my first ever spoken word on stage was at Rooftop Rhythms in Abu Dhabi. And yeah, I mean, they get really good vibes. They have a DJ going during the sets. There's always a very nice venue. So it's actually really cool. The other community that I'm aware of is in Dubai. It's called the Poetry Hood. What's cool about the Poetry Hood is on top of doing open mics, they also try to publish poetry on their platform. So you can literally submit for free and they'll just review it and kind of post it for you. And it kind of gives poets in Dubai the opportunity to kind of publish their work. And again, because in the UAE, there aren't a lot of platforms to do so, to publish poetry or writing, at least not in English as well. Like that's actually quite a big deal to be able to find a platform to do that. So again, in terms of events, not a lot of them. I think it's a shame because what's really amazing about the UAE in general is there's this richness of the Arabic that you can combine with the English. And I think it's just a very different cultural scene than everything that happens in the Western world and something we could really capitalize on. But I think there's a matter of not having the platform and sometimes also the freedom to do so. So I think one thing I would say that changed a lot in my poetry since coming here is that most of the poems I've written since coming here, I would not be able to perform them in the UAE.
Fair enough.
For example, whether it be swearing on stage, whether it be sensitive issues like, I mean, I don't know what to name, but for example, if you want to talk about queer issues, that's not something you would be able to bring up on the scene there. And therefore you are inherently very restricted in what you write, not only in terms of the subjects, but even in terms of the form. That's not always a bad thing. You can still do creative things and go up there and speak and say what you have to say. But you do have to take into account just the cultural and religious context of the country that you're in. And it's a Muslim country. They're very conservative. And while they're very open-minded into, you know, welcoming expats and trying to adapt to this cultural change, in terms, I think, of the poetry and artistic scene, there's still quite a bit of restraints on that.
Well, like, I guess, like, away from the restraints, and like, what kind of topics do come up on the scene there? Like, just anecdotally speaking, like, I've been able to, I'm fortunate enough to go across a lot of the UK, and it does feel like without going into specifics, going to Bristol or going to Edinburgh or going to Glasgow or Manchester will always have a different overarching theme to London. And whilst there's a lot of things that you have in common, it does seem like each city has their own different, whether theme or style. So, like, are there themes that come up quite a lot?
I think a theme that comes up a lot is culture. Because I think, again, on top of like the Middle Eastern experience, there's also the fact that most people who are in Dubai or Abu Dhabi are not from Dubai or Abu Dhabi. And it's actually mostly expats that I think go up on the scene and perform. So I think that is a common theme. And other than that, I'd say when I think about it, the ones that keep coming to mind is just love and kind of those not so sensitive issues that are easy to speak about and that are kind of universal. But yeah, I don't know if I could even point out to a real identity there, but this is what I can say about it.
No, that's perfect. And I guess from there, then, like, coming over to here, then, like, obviously there's a lot of differences between there and here, but, like, what were, like, the first major differences that you noticed coming here and, like, being in the poetry scene here?
I'd say how big of a community it is. I know I've already said that a few times, but it really did take me aback because I was expecting a poetry scene. I wasn't expecting that I'd go to 2-3 events per week and never see the same people at these different events. And I think that's actually quite lovely that you can, just keep going to the same events every month and you will still keep meeting new poets, new poems. Well, new poems too, but new poets, new people, and it's an ever shifting, ever changing scene. And I think that was a big surprise and a really good one for moving here. And then I guess the second one is, again, the content of the poems. Like, here, a lot of talk about, minorities or just certain categories of people, and they can go up there and just do their thing. And I remember, like, there's even, like, erotic poetry nights. Like, this to me was inconceivable in the UAE, like, to have a full night that's literally just for erotica. So it's just refreshingly different and refreshingly open, I'd say.
And, like, especially as someone who's been in the scene for so long, I don't know how someone gets into it now. So, like, how did you find your first night, get into the first night? Like, was it literally just Googling spoken word London, or what was it for you?
It's actually completely by mistake. I moved here in September, but I didn't go to my first poetry event until February, I think. And the way it happened is I found out there was a jazz club situation / restaurant next to where I live. I live in Elephant and Castle. There's a place called Toulouse-Lautrec.
Was it like good? Oh, is it? Oh, I forgot. It's the music and poetry one.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. It's Grooveverse.
Yeah,
but
one.
The way I found about it is I found about the venue, and I went there for a jazz night, like completely unrelated to the poetry thing. And then I was like, oh, they seem to have interesting events. Let me look at their program. And then I see, okay, Grooveverse, spoken word jazz night. And I was like, that sounds amazing. And that is literally how I went to my first event. It was Grooveverse. And you could, like, literally, there was a place to apply for the open mic. So I applied, I got all excited. And it's through that I met people. And then I think what's really cool about London as well is that you meet other poets and they kind of tell you, okay, this event you need to go to and that event you need to go to. So that's how it all started. And then I remember at that event, I had 4 different people telling me to go check the Speak Easy Instagram page, which clearly just gives a list of all of the events that are happening every month. And I think that's really brilliant because there is no platform to kind of tell you everything that's going on. So yeah, that's how it started.
And, like, since you've been on it, like, what have you enjoyed most about this scene since you've been in the London scene?
What have I enjoyed the most? I think the sense of community. I think being new here, it's kind of hard to meet people that you have common interests with. And I think that the poetry community kind of really gave me that chance to meet more people. And now I go to these events alone sometimes, but I've started to know people that are there. And I always feel like I am going to have a friend somewhere. And I think that's actually really specific to the poetry community in the sense of everyone is so kind and open and welcoming. And I think we all know what it's like to go up stage and be vulnerable. And therefore, there's such a mutually supportive atmosphere. And I think that's very special. I don't think it's not something I felt in Dubai, for example, in the poetry scene there.
No, it is lovely that there is a wonderful community aspect in London. And, like, I guess with it, like, does the community aspect did that influence what nights you were going to? Like, what was it that kind of brought you back to nights? Or what was it when someone said a night, it's like, ooh, that one sounds like one to go to? Like, was there anything like, oh, you've mentioned this thing here, that's good? Or was it level of, that's close to me and I'm free that night?
I'm not gonna lie, I think there's a bit more of the practicality side to it. But I think when I went back to to the first one, start of the year, it was just excitement of going back into the scene. Because again, back home, I think I'd gotten to perform like maybe 3 events max. So I'd only ever performed 3 times back in the UAE. And coming here and suddenly realizing how many events there were, to me, it was like, oh, I can go perform and I can go see other poets, kind of learn from them. And I think that actually I learned a lot from just going to all of these different events and seeing what it's like to actually be a poet. So I think it started with all that excitement where I tried a lot of different events, and now I just go back to the ones I like, or just randomly. I don't know, it depends on the mood, I guess.
And now to put you in the hot seat and put pressure on you now,
okay.
I guess ready. on the London slate, did you realize how good you were when you came to the London scene? In as much as like you do seem to have some level of a confidence about you, and like you were fine on stage, and like the thing of like you couldn't, I'd say personally, you wouldn't be able to tell that you only done it 3 times or whatever. So was there ever any moment where it's like, oh no, I'm good at this and I will be fine here, or was that you just kept performing more and just got used to it?
That's interesting. I think if there's one thing I've always been confident about, it's my stage presence. So I think while I doubt my poetry and the content of my poetry a lot, if there's one thing that I know I can manage, it's being on stage and making a performance out of it. And I mean, that's partly why I went into law as well, because I like that opportunity to be in front of an audience. In terms of the poetry itself, I think even when my poems were still like at the very start, when I was still like starting to write, even at the time, I think I had a bit of this arrogance where I thought, oh, this is good stuff, you know? So now when I look back and I compare, I'm like, okay, you weren't that great at the time. But yeah, I think I'm just in this process of like, I have days where I think that my poetry is great and I write a poem and I'm like, oh, that was awesome. And then other days where I like look at a poem, that same poem that I wrote the week before, and I read it again and I'm like, what the fuck is that? Like, what have you been doing? So I think I have ups and downs, but in terms of like performance, I'm always confident about my performance. And I think that's why it comes off like it looks like I know what I'm doing. In terms of writing, I don't know, but in terms of performing, yeah.
Well, like with the ups and downs, you get that feeling on the London scene that like depending on what night you go to, your poem will go better or worse. Do you ever get that feeling?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, what are the kind of factors that contribute to that, do you feel?
Well, I think first of all, it's the audience. Because I feel like sometimes you end up in front of audiences that are very reactive and they'll just be like really into it and cheering for you. And I think when you're up there and you're on stage, it's already quite scary. So when you get reactions from the crowd, even if they're just being like too supportive or if they actually like what you're saying, it kind of does give you that boost where you're like, okay, my poem's like doing well. And then sometimes it depends on, for example, like the generation, like the type of crowd, that if it's younger people, older people, sometimes maybe what I say is going to resonate more with like the younger generations or more with the older generations, whichever. So I think it's mostly the audience for me, but then there's also what other poets are performing on the night. And let's not lie, I think we all go through this where when you see like a poet perform and they're like amazing, you're like fascinated, but also you're like, oof, I kind of feel like I'm not up to standards when I'm performing next to these artists. But I think that's part of the process and it's part of what pushes you as well to kind of improve your writing. So
that audience thing still gets me, in as much as like I keep not keep performing the same poems all the time, but like, I performed a lot of poems so many times, and that thing of like there's some poem where it's like I performed it so much and like people will laugh here, so I've got a bit of a break in the poem there, etc., and all that kind of stuff, and then you get to one audience and it's like, but you didn't laugh there.
And
fuck.
it puts you off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know when I'm putting this podcast out, so I'm not going to say dates specifically, but like I was doing a gig in Aberdeen and like it was a new audience, new crowd, and like they didn't react where I expected them to react. And it's like, right. Oh shit, I've done badly. But then they bought more books than the gig when people did react when but then it's like, so you didn't react, but you liked it and bought the book, so it was working. It just was a different. And I think there was also always that part of it of like, oh crap, the audience are sometimes they will just listen and appreciate it. They're not
always vocal about it. Yeah.
Like before I go into another question, like is the like Abu Dhabi audience and the Dubai audience, like are audiences in UAE like very receptive in that kind of way, or are they a sit down and listen kind of audience?
From my experience, my very little experience, they're a sit and listen kind of audience. So I remember the very first time I performed, they're supportive in the sense of I remember I forgot a line at some point. And instead of just like trying to slide it, I literally stood up there and I was like, I forgot my line. Give me a second. And at that point, everyone cheered and was like very supportive, like you got this and everything. But in terms of like while you're performing, you might get one or two people that like know about the snapping or like go like, and stuff. But it's not like a sort of collective thing. It's just you get that odd person here and there. I think they're more of a silent crowd.
Fair. Well, like, again, putting you on the spot again, and to start this off, also eliminating myself from this conversation in that way of it. Being on the scene here, I'm not saying you must list all of them, but like, who are like the poets or the knights that have like stood out to you since you've been on this scene here?
Oh, tough question.
Anyone you exclude, if you remember later, you can WhatsApp me and we put them as like a little scrolling text underneath.
Okay, well, I want to start by saying that Groovers is definitely one of my favorite nights. And it's mostly because of the ambience. I don't know how to say it. There you go. I'm going to say it the French way, ambiance.
Again, with poets, you can say it however you want to.
There we go, thank you. Yeah, I always leave that night feeling so content and kind of fulfilled because, you know, it's all improvised in terms of the music and the people there are so into it, and it kind of creates, and the venue as well is just gorgeous. It's literally looks like a jazz bar situation. And it was also, I think, my first event that I went to. So I think there's a combination of factors that it has a really special place in my heart. And aside from that, I like slams in general, but that's mostly not because of the way the slam actually goes or how nice the event is, just because like it's competitive. And I find that really fun to just, even if I'm not performing, just to see how the audience, again, going back to the audience, like how the audience reacts to a certain poem, because depending on the night, you might be super lucky where everyone's going to be like, oh, I really relate to that. And then you still have a great poem, but people don't relate to it and you get really low scores. And it's kind of like being a poet that can be pretty hard. But yeah, I'm going to stop it there. I'll WhatsApp you if I have any other thoughts about this.
That's fair. But like, I guess that now kind of brings me into a nice another conversation as well of there are so many people that have so many. I think there's a nice, it's simple to say there's mixed feelings on competitiveness in poetry and competition in poetry and like putting scores to poetry. What are your feelings on that and like the whole judging art form, this art in that way?
I think that it is ambitious to want to compare between artists, especially when we're talking about poetry, and to put scores on it, because you know, there can be so many different styles. There can be so many different kind of subjects or topics that are raised in the same night by such different people. And having to compare that quantitatively when it's actually like literally quality, right, that you're witnessing. I do think that it doesn't completely entirely make sense. But then at the same time, I think we need to put that into perspective of what slams really are, which is just they're an opportunity for poets to go out there and see, you know, how audience reacts to them, how they compare to other poets. And I think so long as you make that decision to want to put yourself in that situation and to kind of, you know, face the consequences of like having scores be put on your own poetry, I don't think there's any harm. I think it's just, we need to keep it into perspective that a slam is just a slam, and it doesn't mean if you're not good at slams, if you don't perform well at slams, it doesn't mean that you're not a good artist or a good poet. It just means that this is not the kind of format that you need to be using to say what you have to say. So I think as well, like slams are at the end of the day a good way of getting people who aren't into poetry to actually come to poetry events, because there's that whole, okay, it's a competition. And how do you get non-poets to want to go to poetry events if they don't know anything about poetry? They're like, ooh, there's scores, you can be a judge. So I think if we want to kind of make the scene more attractive as well to people who aren't themselves poets, I think slams are also a good way to do that.
I think that actually touches on a very good and relevant topic at the moment of like, I've had a few poets that are having a whole debate at the moment of like, what can A, mid-career poets do, but B, with that, like, how do you get people into poetry events that aren't there just to perform? Like, I think I don't know what your actually on this, like, for your experience of the London scene, like, do you feel poets are going to nights mainly to perform or also mainly to watch?
To perform. I think that's a pretty straightforward answer. To perform.
And like, I think I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think there's a level of like, there's so many poets that are looking for places to perform that when you're looking to generate an audience, if there's no chance for a poet to perform, it challenges where the audience comes in, which is why you have things like slam or even things like Grooveverse, which have music and do something different. And I think that is what will help overall. And this is Tyrone's take. This is Tyrone's personal take. I think that will be what helps the scene grow more, is when you get these nights that can expand to audiences just generally. And like, I guess for you then, like, if you are not performing, what would you look for in a night of like, I'm going to go to this night because I just want to go to that night? Like, would it be something like Grooveverse where there's music? Is it always going to be slammer competition? Like, what else kind of would bring you to a night?
I think, again, Grooveverse does it really well, is that I've gone more times to not perform than I have to perform, which I haven't done in a lot of other nights, to be honest. But I think what would be good, for example, is what I struggle with in open mics when I don't want to perform is how long they can be. And let's be honest, poetry is heavy. Like, poetry is not some sort of like, okay, I'm watching Friends, it's light, I can just like turn off, right? When you're there and you really want to appreciate the art, you're really focused, you feel what the poet is saying. And when that goes on for like 2, 3, 4 hours, that can get really heavy. And I think that kind of turns me off of it, because it's like I can't process all of that emotion at once. And I'm also like a very sensitive person. So I feel like if I'm sitting there listening to people spilling their hearts out on stage for like too long, it's just, it's almost like I have to commit to wanting to do that before choosing to go on the night, which is to say a lot. But then in the same time, there's that, like, I have to balance that out with events trying to give everyone a chance to perform, which is also a very honorable thing to do, because you don't always, like, open mics, if it's like in a hat or whatever, as a poet, you don't always get to go up there. And it's cool to have that opportunity. But then I think, again, you have to choose, like, are you doing this to get more audience, or are you doing this to get more poets? And I think when the priority is to get an audience, like a non-poetry audience, then it should be an actual show, like shorts, good breaks, good venue, just like things that would attract people to actually go.
It's one of the things that I'm glad Kayla has pushed me into doing with Process, and that Process now we've kind of put in we finish at 10:30. Right. We're not going later than that, because Kayla's got to go back to freaking Edgware from Hackney Wick, which is a travel.
Right.
And B, this level of like it nights can drag, and like, I respect a lot of nights in London, but like I remember especially when I was starting doing this scene, there was definitely that vibe of like, if I could get home before midnight, that was a win. Right. And it's like, that is not a good bar to be setting, but that was the bar I was setting. Okay. So like, I'm glad that it's changing. And I guess it almost like ties into what I guess will be the last question on this section of like, for all the good that the London scene is, I know we had a different shoot beforehand where you mentioned the issues of lighting, etc., and being in very bright light. So like, if there's anything you could change about the London scene, or things you aren't the biggest fan of the London scene, what are they? Obviously, if you want to call people out by name, do that, but more just a general thing of like, if London's got anything to improve on, what would it be for you?
I think in a lot of situations, maybe the venues, actually. And again, I know that this all depends on like opportunity and availability and all of that. But I think I'm way more attracted to certain events when they're held in a good venue, like whether it be the lighting or even just like that there's an actual stage, or that there's like actual seating, or even that there's not something else going on in the venue at the same time. Because again, with poetry, you're on stage, you're being vulnerable. When you have like, for example, it's in a pub or something, and there's other people that are just drinking and making noise on the side, like that can be a bit disturbing, and it can kind of ruin the magic of the experience. So I'd say venues could be improved.
I am continuously lucky that Process has managed to luck into getting Wall Zero as a venue. Is it the best venue? It's a good venue. It's not maybe not the best venue, but like I freaking love it. And like I am aware, I've gone to a couple of poetry events. It's like, oh, they can still hear the music being played at the bar during this very serious poem, and it's like, the poem is still good, but would have loved to hear that about.
Yeah, it ruins the magic. Yeah.
Yeah, I fully get that, and thank you for that section. I don't have a way to wrap up the section.
Well, thank you,
too. Yeah, like title card, something goes in here, and we'll go to something else now.
Cool.
Now we're going to move on to our section of slow fire questions. Those of you who have watched or seen the channel before may be aware, hopefully are aware, that we do our quick fire questions, asking poets as many questions as they can in 3 minutes. Now we're going to try and let them have time to breathe. Like, there's been so many times people have done quick fire questions. It's like, I want to know more about the answer. That's not the format I've made here. So this is now they're doing a podcast and these are allowed to be longer. I say allowed to be longer. I make quick fire questions. I can make them as long as I want to. Now that I'm in a format that's more suited to that, I'm going to be doing that. I should have got my phone out beforehand. This is so smooth and seamless as Tyrone gets it out. But still with those same questions, but playing around now with the fact we've got time to go into some of them. I have got my list of 100 questions. We will go through however many we see fit. I'm not going to go through all 100. That's a whole podcast in of itself. I'm arbitrarily thinking in my head 3 to 5. We'll see how it goes. Depends on the questions. Right. So can you please give me a number in between 1 and 100 and we'll go from there.
57.
Ooh, cool. 57. So the question is... This is literally the one I gave as an example before.
Oh, no.
It's perfect. Cool. Most money you've spent on clothes. Okay. Welcome to the Poetry Podcast.
Oi, I'm not even the right person to ask. I actually hate shopping. So my mom has been suffering with me my whole life because she always wants to take me shopping because I'm her little girl. And I'm always like, no, I don't want to go shopping. So anyways, I'm thinking as well in like dirhams, right? Yeah. Because I don't know how pounds work.
We can put, again, translation as text on screen.
I think maybe like 120 pounds or something. I think it was on like, on jeans from like, I don't even know the name of the brand. Levi's? Yeah, probably something like that, man.
Well, I guess if it's a vaguely fashion thing, not to be too pointed, but to ask the question then, I've seen you perform a couple of times, the leopard top outfit, the leopard print outfit, like, what, like, I feel like is that a level of, this is my performing outfit? So I'm just curious.
I really wish that I would say yes, this is like my lucky leopard crop top, but no, it is just a lack of having outfits that I like can match. Literally. So just for context, I wore that at the night at the goddamn Poetry Jam, which is where we met. And then I wore it again at Hammer and Tug, which is like the 2 times that you saw me perform aside from Process. And the thing is, I always like to wear skirts on stage because like I find that they're the perfect compromise between elegant, but also I'm comfortable in them.
Yeah.
And as for the top, it's just one of my rare crop tops that aren't just plain black. So I'm like, okay, that's just gonna do.
I mean, is there much thought that goes into the performance outfit, or is it just this is how I'm feeling today?
It's usually like I just want to make sure that I'm comfortable, but I also try not to wear the same stuff all the time. Clearly failing this time around. But no, I don't put a lot of thought into it. It's just I try to just as long as I'm comfortable up there, because I feel like if I'm not wearing an outfit that I feel confident in, then I'm gonna be up there and I'm gonna do fine, but I'm not gonna feel it, you know. I'm not gonna like get that vibe I need. So I guess the leopard one just makes me feel quite confident.
Fair. Cool. Give me another number between 1 and 100.
28.
28. We are going into theatre or film.
Film, but I'd say mostly because I haven't gotten the chance to watch a lot of theater. I think in Dubai, the only thing I have watched would be improv, which is technically they're on a stage, so it is a form of theater. But in terms of anything else, I basically just watch a lot of movies. But I haven't. Actually, here, I've been told a lot to go to musicals and plays and everything, but I just haven't gotten around to it because it's honestly kind of out of my budget. Like, I've been to one musical, and that was because a friend of mine was visiting, and he was kind enough to pay for my ticket.
Right?
So yeah, film.
Again, like, well, on that, like, what kind of films are you into then?
My first default answer is always Disney movies.
Fair.
I'm a big baby. I love everything like animated.
There is nothing wrong with Disney. Like Disney is not
Thank
a baby
you.
thing. Disney is an everyone thing.
Thank you. It's refreshing to have someone have that reaction to me saying Disney movies. Yeah, love Disney movies. Love rom-coms, and then I have the occasional like more cinematographic, if that even makes sense, like more sophisticated social commentary movie, but I have to be in a specific mood
There.
to want to watch those.
And like, are you more of a cinema goer or watch it at home on your own kind of thing, or like somewhere in between?
I think I'm somewhere in between. Back home, again, not much else to do. So I think me and my family, we have a tradition of like, we often go watch movies together. But yeah, I mean, at least here in London, I'm always like just watching it from my computer. So yeah.
Yeah, fair. Cool. Give me another number, please.
I want to pick a good good number. What are good numbers? 82.
Ooh, 82. Do you even lift, bro?
I do, actually. I do. I haven't in a while. I'm
Fair.
not gonna lie. Yeah, it's been a while, but I do. I love fitness. I only started like properly lifting like a few months ago, like actually going to the gym and having a plan and everything. But before that, I just love all sorts of like volleyball or cycling or whatever classes they do at the gym as well. You know, like all of these group classes where you're like boxing the air or whatever. I'm into that kind of stuff.
Like, why fitness for you? Is it like a level of like it's a form of therapy thing, or just a level of it's fitness and it's just a thing to do, or?
I think it's just something I love, at least for when I was playing volleyball. Like, I got really, really into it, and I used to play like 4 or 5 times a week just because it's like, it gives me such a great feeling. And I'm also very competitive, so I love being able to express that within a team setting. And aside from that, I think it is therapy, especially on days where I'm angry and I need to just go like, let it out somewhere. Yeah, it's a mix of both, but mostly just passion. I think I just love it.
The more volleyball comes up, the more I am kind of tempted and sure that future Tyrone is going to put in a Top Gun scene where they're playing volleyball on the beach.
I'm down for that. I will, yes.
Like, I don't even know if that's legal or copyrightable, but yeah, I'll probably do something. Figure that out. What, another number, please?
2.
Ooh, 2. Favorite film?
Oi, no.
Again, I love how we're like, I feel like half the questions are poetry related, half of them are not, and we're picking all the ones that are not poetry related, and I respect that.
Oi, favorite film? Okay, you know what? I'm gonna go for one of the Disney ones.
Go for it.
As a kid, and therefore it still has a special place in my heart, my favorite movie to watch ever was Brave.
Ooh, nice.
And like to this day, it's still like my very like comfort movie. Like when I'm having a sort of bad day, I will go and just watch Brave for the like 20th time.
Random tangent on that. Have you had the chance to go up to Scotland?
I have, but when I was a kid, so I don't remember much of it. I'd like to do that again.
Nice. And like, I guess then like on a vaguely serious thing with the whole film stuff, and you mentioned the improv stuff as well beforehand. With you, like, would you ever see yourself like as a like kind of actor kind of thing, going something like that, or was it just the fun of a little 3 minutes on stage kind of thing?
I think I would suck at acting. I'm not gonna lie. I think I'm good at like performing, but I have a very specific style when I perform, so it's just something I'm comfortable in. But if you were to give me a script and be like, I need you to act like to act like you're feeling this emotion, I think I would probably suck at it. But what I did love about improv though, and it's surprisingly very different than acting, which I didn't know until I actually took some classes, is that you can have so much fun with it, and it kind of tests your ability to think on the spot, but also it encourages you to make mistakes. Yeah. And I love that because everywhere else in life, you're not supposed to make mistakes. And if you make mistakes, like it's a bad thing, like you're failing at life. Whereas in improv, they're like, if you make mistakes, everyone's gonna laugh. Like it's a good thing to do. And I love that.
I know they are different skill sets, but given that you seem to enjoy being on the stage and the whole performance side of things, like how far away from that for you is hosting and doing any hosting side of things? Is that want in the future? Is that a thing you think you'd be good at, or is hosting a level of no, not for me?
I actually have never thought about it, but I think I would enjoy hosting. I think I love having to like the spreading energy. And I think, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know if I'd be good at it because I haven't tried. Like, I think maybe I wouldn't know what to say on stage, but I think I would enjoy it. As in, yeah, maybe. Who knows? You just planted the seed in my head, so thank you.
There you go. Another number, please. We'll eventually get a poetry question. Let's see.
36.
36. There are serious questions on here. I promise you that. And I know it's level up with my list. I could technically just force a poetry question in there. But 36, who'd win in a fight, cavemen or astronauts?
Oi.
See, we're
Can we
asking
actually spend 3 minutes? Oh, we could.
Well, we're asking serious questions here.
Cavemen and astronauts. Probably astronauts, I think. Just because they'd probably be able to, you know, put together a strategy and just like figure their shit out. Not just use like blunt strength, I guess.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Fair play. Another number, please.
Be a serious question. 62.
62. What is the worst thing you've done this week?
What is the worst thing I've done this week? What have I done this week? I don't remember what I did yesterday. And I used to think it was stressful and it was a quick fire question. Now I just hear like awkward silence for a good minute.
I could edit the podcast or I could leave it in there.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna surprise us, I guess. Okay, this is quite lame, but this is the one thing that's coming to mind right now, is that yesterday, I spent basically all day at home, which is fine. But then at around like, I don't know, 4:50, I decided that I wanted to go get a snack from like Sainsbury's, which is usually like, there's my apartment and then there's Sainsbury's like right next to it. So it's literally not even a 1 minute walk. It's like 10 seconds. And I do that. I get dressed, I get down. And of course, Sainsbury's closed the same minute that I went down because it was like, I forgot it was a Sunday and they close at like 5. So I was like, okay, fine. I'm going to walk all the way to the other Sainsbury's knowing that I was like in my flip-flops and like just not prepared whatsoever. And I start walking to the other Sainsbury's. And of course, it's been clear all day. But in that minute, it starts to fucking pour. And so I was like halfway there. I was like, do I persist? Do I go back? I persisted. And I essentially did not even find the one thing that I needed from Sainsbury's in the other Sainsbury's. I bought some random stuff just to say that I did the trip like for a reason. And then I got back home all soaking wet. And all of it because of laziness, because I could have gone like to Sainsbury's an hour before when I had actually initially thought about it. So yeah, there you go.
See, this is the point of the podcast. This is showing you the true poets behind the scenes.
There
like,
you go.
you see Nathalia on stage being all confident and all of that. No, this is the real Nathalia right here. This is what it's all about.
There we are.
Cool. We'll keep going till we get a serious one, Becca. Let's keep going.
94.
What is the last book you have read?
Oh, Everything is Illuminated. Have you read
Nope.
it? Okay,
I don't read.
I don't. Okay, fair enough. From a poet, that's quite entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
No, I think the name of the author is Jonathan something. Anyways, it's actually it's a heavy book. I cried a few times. And I'm not gonna lie, it took me ages to actually finish it because it's written in a very, not confusing, but just you need to like really focus to understand what's going on.
Dense kind of a way.
It is a very dense one. So the kind of the main plot, at least, is this is happening maybe in the late 80s or 90s, and this American man decides to go to Ukraine to trace back his Jewish ancestry, specifically his grandfather. And he gets to Ukraine, and there's this family that basically he hires to translate for him and help him go for the search. And they were searching for this city where supposedly that's where the grandfather was. So anyways, that's like the main plot. But essentially in the way it's written, you get each chapter is like either a part of what the man himself is writing. He's writing a book about the whole thing and about his ancestry. So you get chapters that are the book, chapters that are letters between the translator and the main character who's back in America. And then you have chapters where they're actually just telling the story of what happened during World War II to the whole family. So it gets very confusing, and at first it takes you forever to actually understand what's happening. But it's brilliant in terms of timelines and the way he links it all together. I was really mind blown, and it is worth a read if you're willing to commit to that like emotional heaviness, I'd say.
Fair. And like, are you just in general a big reader, or don't have the time for it, or mix of both?
I love books. It's just that I feel like adulthood, I say. No, yeah. But like, I'm not going to say I'm an adult because I suck at it. But it kind of takes it out of you. And especially I think since I'm studying law, I already do a lot of reading just in like my daily. So actually picking up a book and focusing on it, I find it harder and harder as the years go by. But I think as a kid, I used to sometimes prefer sitting at home and finishing my book than just like going out to the mall with my friends. And I actually, funny that another thing I do want to mention is the very first series that I fell in love with as a kid was Percy Jackson.
Yes.
And literally last week, I went to a bookstore and I wanted a piece of my childhood back. And I bought the first Percy Jackson book again. And I have been reading it over the past week.
I have a whole brand of I don't read. I keep that as a whole thing, which like as you kind of jokingly alluded to, I'm like the whole fun of like, Poe who doesn't read, how the hell does that fucking work? Like, Percy Jackson is one of the few franchises and series that I actually did read. Yes. It hit my niche of like, I don't know why, but like Greek gods, like, you know what? I'm here for that. Tell me more.
I could not agree more. I'm very glad that I mentioned it because, yes.
No, Percy Jackson was a one. I've properly read all of them. I even read the Heroes of Olympus. No, was it? Yes. The sequel stuff as well, but I read that as well.
Which were also that. So great.
It's like, cool. And then there was a whole like Roman and Greek god stuff. And I was like, cool. That's exactly my niche of things. Thank you very much. Like, going back to the Disney thing, like my favorite Disney movie was always Hercules.
Yeah,
it's like, cool, this ticks all of my boxes, and Percy Jackson worked. And like, fair play on that one.
It's a very brilliant series.
Well, let's do one more quick fire, slow fire question. Give me one more number, please.
12.
12 is go-to karaoke song.
I remember this one. Bohemian Rhapsody.
So why Bohemian Rhapsody?
Because I get to do all of the sound effects and I get to scream a lot, and it's just like, it's the one song, if you put it anywhere, I will not be able to not sing to it. And therefore, at a karaoke, that would definitely be my go-to. Also, it gives you like a good 6 minutes to actually be on the mic.
That is a performer talking right there. That is look at me whilst I'm doing my thing.
So yeah, definitely Bohemian Rhapsody.
Well, are you good at karaoke is the question.
Oi. I don't think I am the right person to answer the question. You'd have to hear me and then tell me yourself. No, I think I get too caught up in it and I scream a lot. I'm not actually singing, but then that kind of is the point of karaoke. So if we take it that way, then sure, I'm wonderful at it.
Fair. And with karaoke, is the vibe going for a song that the crowd knows, song that you know, or mix of both? What would you say is the go-to thing for a karaoke thing?
Something I think the audience knows, because I would have, like, if they joined in, I would be very grateful. Yeah.
With that, then I'm still. Let's do an ending of a podcast here, because I know how to segue into an ending of a podcast. But yeah, thank you for joining the Process Poetry podcast. I'm still calling. Yeah, I haven't decided on the name. We're sticking on Process Poetry podcast. I like the alliteration. Nevertheless, thank you for joining us on the podcast. Thank you for having me.
This was actually a lot of fun. So.
I like the use of actually there. It's what makes me feel like so good at heart. So I was expecting it to be bad, but actually it was good.
Actually, I was expecting it to be more stressful. It's more like, so I've been very chill, and I think That's thanks to you, so appreciate it.
Good host, good host.
Exactly.
Nevertheless, can you look into that camera and tell people where to find you online?
Yes, hi. You can find me on Instagram, fractions_of_existence, and on YouTube, but mostly just go on my Instagram, I think. Thanks.
This has been Nathalia, I have been Tyrone, and this has been the Process Poetry Podcast.